The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Margaret's Chapel, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews where Camilla sat in complete silence. Her trembling hands clutched a crumpled tissue, and her eyes remained fixed on the altar where she had imagined walking down the aisle just hours before. The chapel, which should have been filled with the joyous sounds of wedding bells and laughter, now echoed only with the sound of her quiet breathing. Camilla's wedding dress hung in the small preparation room behind her, still pristine and untouched. The delicate lace sleeves and pearl buttons that had taken months to perfect now seemed like cruel reminders of dreams that would never come true. She had spent the entire night in this sacred space, unable to bring herself to leave, unable to face the reality that awaited her outside these walls. The events of yesterday felt like a terrible nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. Everything had been perfect. The flowers were arranged, the guests had arrived, and even the weather had cooperated with clear skies and gentle warmth. Camilla had been in the bridal suite, applying her final touches of makeup when her maid of honor, Sarah, burst through the door with tears streaming down her face. "Camilla, I'm so sorry," Sarah had whispered, her voice breaking with each word. "There's something you need to know before you walk down that aisle." The memory of those words still sent chills down Camilla's spine. She had turned away from the mirror, her heart already beginning to race with a sense of impending doom. Sarah's face was pale, and her hands shook as she held her phone. "It's about Marcus," Sarah continued, struggling to find the right words. "Someone sent me these photos from last night." Camilla's world began to crumble as she looked at the images on Sarah's phone. There was Marcus, her fiancé of 3 years, the man she had trusted with her entire future, in the arms of another woman. The photos were clear and undeniable, taken at what appeared to be a hotel room, showing Marcus in intimate embraces with someone Camilla recognized as his colleague from work. The woman in the photos was Rebecca, the same Rebecca who had been nothing more than a friendly face at office parties, the same Rebecca who had helped plan their engagement celebration, the same Rebecca who had smiled and congratulated Camilla just weeks before while knowing she was betraying her in the most devastating way possible. Camilla's legs had given out beneath her as the full weight of the betrayal hit her like a physical blow. 3 years of planning their future together, 3 years of believing in their love, 3 years of building dreams that were now shattered beyond repair. The engagement ring on her finger suddenly felt heavy and foreign, like a piece of jewelry that belonged to someone else entirely. Sarah had helped her to a chair, but Camilla felt completely numb. The sounds of guests arriving downstairs, the gentle music playing in the background, the excited chatter of family members. Everything felt distant and surreal, as if she was watching someone else's life fall apart. "How long?" Camilla had managed to whisper, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "I don't know," Sarah replied honestly. "But these photos, they were taken last night. The night before your wedding, Camilla. I'm so sorry." The cruelty of the timing wasn't lost on Camilla. Marcus had been with another woman on the very night before he was supposed to pledge his eternal love and devotion to her. The bachelor party that she had encouraged him to have, thinking it was sweet and traditional, had apparently been a cover for his final betrayal. When Marcus finally arrived at the chapel, acting as if nothing had happened, Camilla confronted him in the small vestibule away from the guests. His face had turned white when she showed him the photos, and, for a moment, she hoped he might deny everything, might explain that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, Marcus had looked down at his shoes and said the words that would haunt her forever. "I'm sorry, Camilla. I never meant for you to find out this way." Not that he was sorry for what he had done, not that it was a mistake he regretted, but that he was sorry she had discovered his betrayal. In that moment, Camilla realized that the man she thought she knew, the man she had planned to spend her life with, was a complete stranger. The conversation that followed was a blur of accusations, weak excuses, and painful revelations. Marcus admitted that his relationship with Rebecca had been going on for months. He claimed he had been trying to end it, but His words rang hollow when confronted with photos from the previous night. He begged for forgiveness, promised it would never happen again, and even suggested they could postpone the wedding and work through their problems. But Camilla knew in her heart that there was no coming back from this level of betrayal. The foundation of trust that their relationship had been built on was completely destroyed. Every memory they had shared was now tainted with doubt and suspicion. Every "I love you" he had spoken was now questionable. Every moment of intimacy they had shared was now contaminated by the knowledge that he had been sharing those same moments with someone else. The hardest part had been telling the guests. Camilla's parents had been devastated, not just for their daughter's pain, but for the embarrassment and confusion that would follow. Marcus's family had been shocked and apologetic, but their sympathy felt hollow when their own son was the cause of such heartbreak. One by one, the guests had been informed that the wedding was canceled. Some left quietly with understanding nods, while others lingered with offers of support and comfort that Camilla wasn't ready to accept. The beautiful reception venue that had been decorated with white roses and golden ribbons would go unused. The expensive catering that had been planned for months would be wasted. The honeymoon tickets to Italy would need to be canceled. But those material losses seemed insignificant compared to the emotional devastation Camilla was experiencing. She had lost not just a fiancé, but her faith in love itself. She had lost her confidence in her ability to judge character. She had lost the future she had so carefully planned and the security of knowing someone loved her unconditionally. As the last of the guests departed and the chapel grew quiet, Camilla had asked to be left alone. Her parents had reluctantly agreed, understanding that she needed time to process what had happened. Sarah had offered to stay, but Camilla insisted she needed solitude to begin making sense of her shattered world. Now, as she sat in the empty chapel watching the morning light grow stronger, Camilla tried to imagine what her life would look like moving forward. The apartment she and Marcus had shared would need to be dealt with. The joint bank accounts and credit cards would need to be separated. The engagement announcements that had been sent to distant relatives would need awkward follow-up calls. But beyond the practical matters, Camilla faced the much more difficult task of rebuilding her sense of self. She had defined herself for so long as part of a couple, as Marcus's fiancée, as a woman planning her wedding and future family. Now she was forced to rediscover who she was as an individual, what she wanted from life beyond the dreams she had built with someone who had proven unworthy of her trust. The sound of footsteps on the stone floor interrupted her thoughts. Camilla turned to see Father Mackenzie, the elderly priest who had been scheduled to perform the ceremony, approaching with a gentle smile and 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might need some company," he said softly, settling into the pew beside her. "And perhaps some tea." Camilla accepted the warm cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around it for comfort. Father Mackenzie had known her family for years and had watched her grow up in this very chapel. His presence was somehow soothing, even in the midst of her pain. "I keep thinking about all the signs I must have missed," Camilla said quietly, speaking her first words in hours. "How could I have been so blind?" Father Mackenzie considered her question carefully before responding. "Sometimes we see what we want to see, especially when we love someone. That doesn't make you foolish, Camilla. It makes you human." His words offered little comfort, but Camilla appreciated his honesty. She had been replaying every conversation, every interaction, every moment from the past few months, looking for clues she had overlooked. There had been times when Marcus seemed distant, times when he claimed to be working late more frequently, times when he seemed less interested in wedding planning than she expected. But she had attributed these things to pre-wedding stress, never imagining they might indicate something much more sinister. "What am I supposed to do now?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone will be talking about this. Everyone will pity me or wonder what I did wrong." "You hold your head high," Father Mackenzie replied firmly. "You've done nothing wrong, Camilla. You love someone honestly and completely. That's never something to be ashamed of, even when that love isn't returned with the same honesty." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Camilla began to feel the first small stirrings of something beyond grief and humiliation. It might have been anger or perhaps determination, but whatever it was, it felt like the beginning of a long journey toward healing and self-discovery. The chapel bells began to chime 10 o'clock, marking the time when she should have been walking down the aisle to begin her new life as a married woman. Instead, she was sitting alone, facing an uncertain future with only her own strength to rely on. The irony wasn't lost on her, but somehow, in this moment of complete devastation, Camilla began to sense that this ending might also be a beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the chapel incident, and Camilla found herself standing in the doorway of the apartment she had once shared with Marcus. The space that had once felt like home now seemed foreign and hostile, filled with memories that stung like physical wounds. Moving boxes lined the hallway, a stark reminder that her life was literally being packed away and divided into separate pieces. Her sister Emma had taken time off work to help with the painful process of separating 3 years of shared belongings. Each item required a decision that felt impossibly difficult. Who got the coffee maker they had bought together on their first anniversary? What about the books they had collected from various trips? The framed photographs that documented their relationship now seemed like evidence of a crime rather than cherished memories. "You can keep the couch," Camilla said, her voice flat and emotionless as she gestured toward the living room furniture. "I never really liked it anyway." This wasn't entirely true. She had actually helped pick out that couch, spending an entire Saturday afternoon at furniture stores with Marcus, debating between different fabrics and colors. They had finally agreed on a deep blue sectional that was supposed to be perfect for their future home together. Now, looking at it just reminded her of another shared decision that would never matter again. Emma paused in her packing to study her sister's face. "Camilla, you don't have to give away everything just because it has memories attached to it. Some of these things are yours, and you have every right to keep them." But Camilla couldn't bear the thought of taking anything that would remind her of Marcus into her new life. She had found a small one-bedroom apartment across town, deliberately choosing a place that was nothing like the home she had shared with him. It was smaller, older, and required more work, but it was entirely hers, untainted by broken promises and shattered dreams. The process of starting over was more complex than Camilla had imagined. Beyond the physical task of moving, there were countless administrative details that needed attention. She had to change her address with banks, insurance companies, and her employer. The joint credit cards needed to be canceled, and shared accounts had to be closed or transferred. Each phone call and form felt like another small death, another piece of their shared life being formally dissolved. The wedding vendors had been surprisingly understanding about the cancellations, though some deposits were lost entirely. The florist, Mrs. Henderson, had actually sent Camilla a small bouquet of white roses with a note saying she was sorry for what had happened and hoped Camilla would find happiness again someday. That unexpected kindness had brought Camilla to tears, the first time she had cried since that terrible morning in the chapel. Returning to work had been one of the most difficult challenges. Camilla worked as a graphic designer for a marketing firm, and many of her colleagues had been invited to the wedding. Their well-meaning expressions of sympathy and concern only served to keep the wound fresh. She found herself having the same awkward conversation dozens of times, explaining that the wedding had been called off without going into the painful details of why. Her boss, Janet, had been particularly supportive, offering to let Camilla work from home for a few weeks while she adjusted to her new circumstances. But Camilla had declined, knowing that staying busy with projects and deadlines was probably better than spending all day alone with her thoughts. The hardest part of each workday was walking past the desk where Marcus used to work. His company shared the building with hers, and for 3 years, they had often met for lunch or coffee breaks. His absence from that familiar space was like a constant reminder of what she had lost. She learned to take different routes through the building, avoiding the areas where she might encounter Rebecca or other reminders of his betrayal. Camilla's social life had become complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated. Many of their friends had been couples they had socialized with together, and now she felt awkward and out of place in those group dynamics. Some friends had clearly chosen sides, making their loyalty to Marcus apparent by their sudden distance from Camilla. Others seemed uncomfortable around her, as if her situation might be contagious, as if the failure of her relationship somehow threatened the security of their own. Her closest friends, particularly Sarah, had been wonderful sources of support, but even their kindness sometimes felt overwhelming. They wanted to help her move forward, to encourage her to start dating again, or to plan fun activities that would distract her from her pain. But Camilla wasn't ready for distractions. She needed to sit with her grief and anger to fully process what had happened before she could even think about moving forward. The evenings were the worst. In her new apartment, surrounded by boxes she hadn't yet found the energy to unpack, Camilla often found herself staring at the walls and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. She replayed conversations with Marcus, searching for clues she had missed, moments when she should have questioned his behavior or demanded more honesty. One particularly difficult evening, she found herself looking through old text messages between them on her phone. Reading his declarations of love and excitement about their future together now felt like reading fiction. Had any of it been real? Had he ever truly loved her? Or had she been convenient, familiar, safe while he pursued excitement with someone else? The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the fundamental dishonesty that had poisoned every interaction they'd had for months. Every time he had told her he loved her while secretly seeing Rebecca. Every time he had made plans for their future while undermining their present. Every time he had participated in wedding preparations while knowing he wasn't committed to the marriage. All of it felt like a systematic deception that called into question everything Camilla thought she knew about their relationship. Her therapist, Dr. Martinez, whom she had started seeing shortly after the chapel incident, helped her understand that this questioning and self-doubt was a normal part of processing betrayal trauma. She explained that when someone's trust is violated so completely, it's natural to doubt one's own judgment and perception of reality. "You're not crazy for having believed him, Dr." Martinez had said during one of their sessions. He was actively working to maintain a false reality. That takes deliberate effort and planning. You couldn't have seen through something he was specifically trying to hide from you. These sessions were helping Camilla begin to separate Marcus's choices from her own worth and judgment. She was starting to understand that his betrayal was about his character flaws, not about any failing on her part. But intellectual understanding and emotional healing were two very different things, and her heart was taking much longer to accept what her mind already knew. One afternoon, while packing up the last of her belongings from the shared apartment, Camilla discovered a box of letters and cards that Marcus had given her over the years. Birthday cards with handwritten messages about how much she meant to him. Valentine's Day letters describing their perfect future together. Anniversary gifts accompanied by notes about how lucky he felt to have her in his life. Reading these now felt like discovering evidence of an elaborate con game. Had he meant any of it when he wrote it? Or had these gestures always been hollow, designed to maintain her trust while he pursued his own selfish interests? The cruelty of keeping these sentimental items while betraying everything they supposedly represented was almost too much to bear. Emma found her sister sitting on the bedroom floor, surrounded by these papers, tears streaming down her face for the first time since the initial discovery of Marcus's infidelity. "I don't understand how someone can write these things and then do what he did," Camilla said, holding up a particularly romantic letter from their second anniversary. "How do you tell someone they're your everything while you're secretly planning to destroy their life?" Emma sat down beside her sister, gently taking the letters from her hands. Maybe he meant it when he wrote it, and something changed. Or maybe he's just really good at saying what he thinks people want to hear. Either way, it doesn't reflect on you or your worth, Camilla. But Camilla struggled with the implications of both possibilities. If Marcus had meant those words when he wrote them, what had changed? What had she done or failed to do that made him seek intimacy elsewhere? If he had never meant them, How could she trust her ability to recognize genuine love in the future? The financial aspects of their separation were proving complicated as well. They had joint savings for the wedding and honeymoon, shared investments, and several large purchases they had made together for their planned future home. Dividing these assets required lawyers and negotiations that prolonged the painful process of disentanglement. Marcus had initially tried to contact her directly about these matters, calling and texting with what he claimed were practical concerns, but often devolved into attempts to justify his behavior or requests for forgiveness. Camilla had finally blocked his number and insisted all communication go through their respective attorneys. His attempts to maintain contact felt manipulative rather than genuinely remorseful. He wanted forgiveness without truly acknowledging the depth of his betrayal. He wanted to ease his own guilt without taking responsibility for the devastating impact of his choices. Camilla recognized these patterns through her therapy sessions and refused to provide him with the absolution he seemed to be seeking. The worst part was learning about the extent of the deception. Through mutual friends and inadvertent discoveries during the separation process, Camilla learned that Marcus and Rebecca's relationship had been much more serious and long-lasting than he had initially admitted. They had been seen together at various events and locations over many months, behaving like a couple, while Camilla was none the wiser. This revelation made every social gathering they had attended together during that period feel like a public humiliation she hadn't even known she was experiencing. How many people had known about the affair? How many pitying looks had she received without understanding why? How many conversations had stopped when she entered a room? The sense of having been made a fool of was almost as devastating as the original betrayal. Camilla felt like she had been living in a false reality while everyone around her knew the truth. The isolation and embarrassment were overwhelming, making her question not just her relationship with Marcus, but her entire social circle. As she prepared to leave their shared apartment for the final time, Camilla took one last look around the space where she had been so happy, so hopeful about the future. The walls still held the nail holes from pictures they had hung together. The kitchen still had the coffee stain on the counter from a morning when Marcus had been rushing to work. These tiny physical remnants of their life together seemed almost sacred now, the only honest evidence of what they had actually shared. Standing in the empty living room with her final box of belongings, Camilla felt a strange sense of completion. This chapter of her life was officially closed. Whatever came next would be entirely her own creation, built on her own terms with her own choices. The freedom was terrifying, but it was also the first thing that had felt genuinely hopeful since that terrible morning in the chapel. 6 months had passed since Camilla's world collapsed in that chapel, and she found herself sitting in a coffee shop she had never visited before, deliberately choosing places that held no memories of her former life. The journal in front of her was filled with pages of thoughts, emotions, and observations that Dr. Martinez had encouraged her to write as part of her healing process. Today's entry was different from the angry, hurt-filled pages that had dominated the early weeks of her recovery. The coffee shop was busy with the usual mix of business people grabbing their morning caffeine fix and students with laptops spread across tables. Camilla had grown to appreciate these anonymous public spaces where she could observe life happening around her without feeling obligated to participate in conversations or explain her situation to well-meaning acquaintances. Her new apartment had finally begun to feel like home. The boxes were unpacked, the walls were painted in colors she had chosen without consulting anyone else, and she had decorated the space with things that brought her joy rather than trying to accommodate someone else's preferences. The small balcony overlooking a quiet tree-lined street had become her favorite spot for morning coffee and evening reflection. Work had become a source of satisfaction and achievement in ways it hadn't been before. Without the distraction of planning a wedding and managing a relationship, Camilla had thrown herself into her graphic design projects with renewed focus and creativity. Her boss, Janet, had noticed the improvement in her work and had recently offered her a promotion to senior designer. which came with more responsibility, better pay, and the opportunity to work on larger, more prestigious accounts. The promotion had given Camilla something she hadn't expected, a sense of pride in her individual accomplishments that had nothing to do with being part of a couple. For years, she had measured her success partly through the lens of her relationship with Marcus. Now she was discovering what it felt like to achieve something purely through her own efforts and talents. Her relationship with her family had also evolved during this period of upheaval. Her parents, who had initially been devastated by the wedding cancellation, had gradually come to understand that Camilla's situation was actually a blessing in disguise. They had never particularly liked Marcus, though they had kept their reservations to themselves out of respect for Camilla's choices. Now, they felt free to express their relief that she had discovered his true character before legally binding herself to him. Emma had become more than just a sister during this difficult time. She had become Camilla's closest confidant and strongest supporter. Their relationship had deepened through the process of helping Camilla rebuild her life. Emma had been present for every difficult moment, from packing up the shared apartment to attending therapy sessions when Camilla needed moral support. "I'm proud of how strong you've become," Emma had told her during a recent dinner together. "I know this has been the hardest thing you've ever gone through, but you're not the same person who was sitting in that chapel 6 months ago. You're stronger, more independent, more sure of yourself." Camilla had been surprised to realize that Emma was right. The woman who had been so devastated by Marcus's betrayal had been someone who defined herself largely through her relationship. She had been Camilla and Marcus's fiancée, the woman planning the perfect wedding. Now she was simply Camilla, and that identity felt more solid and authentic than the coupled version had ever been. The therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez had been instrumental in helping her understand the patterns that had made her vulnerable to Marcus's deception. She had been so eager to be loved and accepted that she had ignored red flags and made excuses for behavior that should have concerned her. She had prioritized harmony over honesty, avoiding difficult conversations that might have revealed problems in their relationship. "You were trained from a young age to be accommodating and pleasing," Dr. Martinez had explained. "Those aren't bad qualities, but they can make someone susceptible to manipulation if they're not balanced with strong boundaries and self-advocacy." Learning to trust her own instincts again had been one of the most challenging aspects of Camilla's healing journey. Marcus's systematic deception had made her doubt her ability to read people and situations accurately. Every new person she met, every friendship she considered developing, was filtered through the fear that she might be missing important warning signs again. But gradually, through therapy and conscious practice, Camilla was rebuilding her confidence in her own judgment. She had learned to pay attention to her gut feelings rather than dismissing them in favor of what seemed logical or convenient. She had learned to ask direct questions rather than assuming the best about people's motivations. The social aspect of her new life had required the most careful navigation. Some friendships had naturally fallen away when it became clear that they had been based more on her relationship with Marcus than on genuine connection with her as an individual. Other friendships had deepened as people showed their true colors through their support during her difficult time. Dating was a topic that everyone seemed eager to discuss, but Camilla wasn't ready to consider. Well-meaning friends and family members frequently suggested that she might feel better if she got back out there and met someone new, but the idea of opening herself up to that level of vulnerability again felt impossible. "I'm not closed to the possibility of love in the future," she had written in her journal one evening. "But right now, I'm falling in love with my own life, my own company, my own dreams and goals. I want to be whole and complete as an individual before I even consider sharing that wholeness with someone else." This perspective had been a hard one. In the immediate aftermath of the betrayal, Camilla had swung between never wanting to trust anyone again and desperately wanting to find someone who would restore her faith in love. Dr. Martinez had helped her understand that both of these extreme reactions were normal, but that the healthiest path forward lay somewhere in between. One unexpected development had been Camilla's growing interest in photography. She had always enjoyed taking pictures, but had never seriously pursued it as more than a casual hobby. During her healing process, she had started taking long walks through different neighborhoods, capturing images that caught her eye. The practice of looking for beauty and meaning in everyday scenes had become a form of meditation and therapy. Her photographs were getting good enough that she had started sharing some on social media, and several people had asked if she would be willing to do portrait sessions or event photography. The idea of building a side business around something she was passionate about excited Camilla in ways she hadn't felt in years. Maybe this whole terrible experience was necessary to wake me up to possibilities I wouldn't have considered otherwise, she had written in her journal. If I had married Marcus and settled into the life we had planned, I might never have discovered this creative passion or achieved the promotion at work or learned how capable I am of handling major life challenges. This wasn't to say that she was grateful for the betrayal. The pain had been too real and too devastating for that. But she was beginning to see how the destruction of her old life had created space for a new and potentially better one to emerge. The financial independence that had been forced upon her was also proving to be empowering. For the first time in her adult life, Camilla was making decisions based solely on her own priorities and preferences. The apartment lease, the furniture purchases, the monthly budget, everything was hers to control. This autonomy felt both liberating and slightly overwhelming, but it was building her confidence in her ability to manage her own life successfully. One evening, while editing some of her recent photographs, Camilla received an unexpected text message from an unknown number. Her heart rate immediately spiked, wondering if Marcus had somehow found a way to contact her despite being blocked. Instead, the message was from Rebecca. "Camilla, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know how sorry I am for what happened. I've been wanting to reach out for months, but didn't know if it would make things worse for you. I know there's nothing I can say that will undo the hurt we caused, but I wanted you to know that I think about what we did to you every day, and I'm deeply ashamed of my part in it." Camilla stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mixture of anger, curiosity, and something that might have been satisfaction. The apology felt genuine, though it was impossible to know for certain. What struck her most was how little she cared about Rebecca's guilt or remorse. 6 months ago, she would have been consumed with questions about the other woman, desperate to understand what Rebecca had offered that she hadn't been able to provide. Now, the entire situation felt like it belonged to a different person's life. She wasn't interested in Rebecca's perspective or justifications. She wasn't curious about whether their relationship had continued after the wedding day disaster. She simply didn't care enough about either of them to invest emotional energy in their story. Camilla deleted the message without responding and returned to her photo editing. It occurred to her that this lack of burning curiosity or desperate need for closure might be the clearest sign, yet that she was truly healing. The people who had caused her such devastating pain were becoming irrelevant to her current life and future plans. That night, she made a list in her journal of things she was looking forward to: her first solo vacation, which she was planning for the following month, the photography workshop she had signed up for, the possibility of freelance work that might eventually allow her to reduce her hours at the marketing firm, the small dinner party she was hosting for Emma, and a few close friends to celebrate her 6-month anniversary of independent living. The list was entirely focused on her own interests and goals, with no reference to finding a partner or rebuilding the coupled life she had once thought was essential to her happiness. For the first time since the chapel incident, Camilla felt excited about her future rather than just surviving her present. As she prepared for bed in her quiet, safe apartment, Camilla reflected on how different her life was from what she had imagined 6 months earlier. She had planned to be settling into married life, perhaps starting to think about children and mortgages and all the traditional milestones that had once seemed so important. Instead, she was building a life that was uniquely her own, discovering strengths and interests she hadn't known she possessed, and developing a relationship with herself that was deeper and more honest than any she had ever had with another person. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was becoming a life she genuinely loved and respected. 2 years had transformed Camilla's life in ways she could never have imagined during those dark first months after the chapel incident. She stood in the gallery space downtown, surrounded by 30 of her photographs that would be displayed in her first solo exhibition next week. The images captured moments of beauty and resilience she had discovered during her journey of healing and self-discovery. The gallery owner, Mrs. Chun, walked through the space with obvious satisfaction, adjusting the lighting on several pieces. "These photographs tell such a powerful story," she said to Camilla. "There's something about the way you capture light and shadow that speaks to overcoming darkness. I think this exhibition is going to be very well received." Camilla's photography had evolved from a therapeutic hobby into a legitimate artistic pursuit and growing business. What had started as solitary walks through the city with her camera had developed into commissioned work, portrait sessions, and now this gallery showing. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but rather through consistent dedication and the encouragement of mentors who recognized her talent. The promotion at her marketing firm had led to another advancement, and she was now the creative director, managing a team of designers and working directly with major clients. The confidence she had built through surviving her personal crisis had translated into professional boldness. She took creative risks that paid off, spoke up in meetings with ideas that impressed clients, and advocated for herself in ways she had never done before the betrayal forced her to become her own strongest supporter. Her apartment had been replaced by a small house with a converted garage that served as her photography studio. The space was entirely her own creation, reflecting her aesthetic preferences and practical needs without compromise. The studio hosted regular workshops where she taught photography to other women who were going through major life transitions. Teaching had become an unexpected source of joy and fulfillment. The student workshops had grown out of Camilla's volunteer work with a local nonprofit that supported women leaving abusive relationships. Her own experience with betrayal and recovery had given her unique insights into the process of rebuilding life after devastating loss. She understood the importance of rediscovering personal identity separate from romantic partnerships. "I wish I could take a picture of my life and show it to the woman I was 2 years ago," Camilla had written in her journal recently. She was so afraid that the end of her engagement meant the end of her chances for happiness. She couldn't imagine that losing what she thought she wanted would lead to finding what she actually needed. Emma had been her most consistent supporter throughout the transformation, celebrating each milestone and providing honest feedback when Camilla needed perspective. Their relationship had become even stronger as they both matured into more independent adults. Emma had started her own business during this period, inspired partly by watching her sister's courage in rebuilding her life from scratch. "You know what I noticed about you lately?" Emma had said during their most recent sister dinner. "You smile differently now. Before, you were always smiling to please other people or because you thought you should be happy. Now you smile because you actually are happy from the inside out." This observation had struck Camilla as particularly insightful. The happiness she felt now was fundamentally different from what she had experienced during her relationship with Marcus. That happiness had been dependent on external validation and the security of being part of a couple. Her current contentment came from within, from knowing she could handle whatever life brought her, from taking pride in her own accomplishments and relationships. The therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez had evolved over time from crisis counseling to personal development work. They now met monthly rather than weekly, focusing on maintaining healthy boundaries and continuing to build confidence in her judgment about people and situations. The work had been invaluable in helping Camilla recognize her own patterns and make conscious choices about how she wanted to engage with others. Dating had eventually become part of Camilla's life again, but in a completely different way than before. She had gone through a period of casual dating that helped her practice trusting her instincts and maintaining her independence while getting to know new people. She had learned to enjoy masculine company without immediately evaluating every interaction through the lens of potential long-term partnership. Currently, she was seeing David, a fellow photographer she had met through a professional workshop 6 months earlier. Their relationship was developing slowly and thoughtfully, with both of them prioritizing honest communication and individual growth alongside their connection to each other. David had his own history of recovering from a difficult divorce, which gave him understanding of Camilla's need to maintain her independence and carefully built new life. What struck Camilla most about this relationship was how different it felt from her time with Marcus. With Marcus, she had often found herself adapting her preferences and opinions to avoid conflict or maintain harmony. With David, disagreements were addressed directly, individual interests were respected and encouraged, and there was no pressure to rush into deeper commitment before both people felt ready. "I'm not the same person who was so desperate to be chosen that I ignored red flags," Camilla had explained to David early in their relationship. "I know now that I'm complete on my own, which means I'm only interested in partnerships that add to my life rather than filling gaps in it." This clarity about her own worth and needs had been the most valuable outcome of her healing process. She no longer feared being alone because she genuinely enjoyed her own company. She no longer made decisions based primarily on what would make other people happy, because she had learned the importance of honoring her own values and preferences. The photography exhibition opening was scheduled for Friday evening, and Camilla's entire support network would be there to celebrate with her. Her parents, who had watched their daughter transform from a devastated woman into a confident artist and entrepreneur, were flying in from out of state. Emma had helped plan a small gathering after the official opening to commemorate this major milestone. Even some of her former colleagues from the marketing firm, including Janet, planned to attend. Many of them had followed Camilla's journey through social media and were excited to see her artistic work displayed professionally. The support of her professional network had been another unexpected source of strength during her rebuilding process. Preparing for the exhibition had required Camilla to revisit the emotional journey documented in her photographs. Some images were from the early days of her healing, when she was literally learning to see beauty in everyday moments as a way of countering the darkness she felt inside. Others captured the gradual return of joy and confidence as she built her new life. The most recent photographs showed a mastery of technique and artistic vision that reflected her growth as both an artist and a person. One photograph in particular held special meaning for her. It was an image of the chapel where her wedding should have taken place, taken exactly 1 year after the incident. She had driven there on the anniversary date, not sure what she expected to feel or find. Instead of pain or anger, she had felt a profound sense of gratitude for the experience that had ultimately led to her discovering her true self. The chapel photograph captured the building in golden afternoon light, with shadows that suggested both ending and beginning. It was titled Sacred Interruption, reflecting Camilla's belief that sometimes what feels like devastating loss is actually a necessary redirection toward a better path. Mrs. Chon approached with the final details for the opening reception. "I've had several inquiries about purchasing pieces already, just from the preview images we shared. There's something about your work that resonates with people who have been through their own transformations." This feedback reinforced Camilla's sense that her art was serving a purpose beyond personal expression. She hoped her photographs would speak to others who were navigating difficult transitions, helping them see that endings could become beginnings and that surviving betrayal or loss could lead to discovering inner strength they didn't know they possessed. The evening before the exhibition opening, Camilla sat in her studio, surrounded by the photographs that would soon be displayed publicly. Each image represented a moment in her journey from devastation to renewal, from dependence to self-reliance, from fear to confidence. She thought about Marcus occasionally, usually with indifference rather than anger. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that his relationship with Rebecca had ended badly, and that he had struggled professionally after their betrayal became known in their workplace. She felt no satisfaction in his difficulties, but also no sympathy. His choices had consequences that extended beyond their impact on her, and he was responsible for managing those consequences. The woman who had been so devastated by his betrayal now understood that his actions had revealed his character, not her worth. She had learned to separate other people's choices from her own value, to take responsibility for her own healing without accepting blame for other people's harmful behavior. As she prepared for bed on the night before her exhibition opening, Camilla felt a deep sense of completion regarding this chapter of her life. The scared, heartbroken woman who had sat alone in that chapel 2 years earlier had evolved into someone she was proud to be. The journey had been difficult, but it had led to discoveries about her own strength, creativity, and capacity for growth that she might never have made otherwise. Tomorrow, she would celebrate not just her artistic achievement, but the comprehensive transformation that had made this success possible. She would be surrounded by people who had supported her journey and by artwork that documented her process of becoming who she was truly meant to be. The exhibition was titled After the Ending, reflecting Camilla's belief that what feels like conclusion is often actually commencement. Standing in her studio, surrounded by evidence of her artistic growth and personal evolution, she felt ready to share her story with the world through the universal language of visual art. Her phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Can't wait to see you shine tomorrow night. So proud of everything you've accomplished." Camilla smiled as she read his words, appreciating his support while knowing that her pride in herself was no longer dependent on external validation. She had learned to be her own biggest supporter, her own strongest advocate, and her own most reliable source of encouragement. The chapel where her old life had ended was now just one location among many in the city she had come to know through her photographer's eye. Tomorrow's exhibition would celebrate not what had been lost, but what had been found. The announcement that had once resounded through those hallowed halls had indeed changed everything, just not in the way anyone had expected at the time. As Camilla turned off the studio lights and headed toward her house, she felt grateful for the path that had led her to this moment. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of her story had actually been the beginning of a much more authentic and fulfilling narrative. She was ready to share that story with the world, one photograph at a time.